Thank you, everyone. Welcome back. We have Judge Sandy with us today. He is with the Iowa Courts of Appeals, and he is going to speak to us about treatment courts. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we will address them at the end of his session. Thank you.
All right, first a disclaimer so I don't get in trouble. Anything that I say is not necessarily the viewpoint of the Iowa Judicial Branch, but rather it's Judge Sandy's personal viewpoints, despite the fact that I'm talking about judicial stuff. Second thing is I usually do this with my ride and die. His name's Richard Gordon, and he's the specialty treatment court coordinator for the state of Iowa, but he had a conflict, so it's just my presentation today, and I'm not doing it in tandem with him. But the reason I give that disclaimer about Richard not being here is because he usually tackles like the first part of the presentation, and I do the tail end, specifically the judge-specific presentation. So if you guys ask me questions that get into the weeds about some of the research and the treaties and journals that back up some of the data, he's going to be a better suited person to field that. I know enough to be dangerous, but some of those things he's better versed at than I am. But in any event, let's get started. So a little bit about me. I was appointed to the Iowa Court of Appeals back in June of this last year. However, prior to that, I had started, or at least caused to have started, a drug treatment court in Clay and Dickinson County in Northwest Iowa. That's District 3. And prior to my appointment to the bench, I was a criminal defense attorney. And one of my frustrations was, at least in the more rural areas like Spencer, Spirit Lake, Northwest Iowa, I kind of call it like the resource desert. And what I meant by that was like you either went to probation or prison. There really wasn't like a stopgap in between. And I was frustrated because I was a public defender in the state of Minnesota, and just 15 miles north in Jackson County, Minnesota, they had a very robust drug treatment court program as an alternative sentencing options. And I was frustrated because I had these clients in Jackson County, Minnesota, who I could have this as a dispositional alternative. And then I'd cross the border and have a similarly situated defendant in Iowa, and they were hosed basically because they had the same struggles that the Minnesota client had, 15 miles apart, but because of the differences in the system, we just didn't have drug court. In part because no judge was willing to do it in District 3, in part just because of some lack of resources and interest in that type of thing. So when I got appointed to the district bench in 2021, the first thing I did was reach out to my chief judge in the district and some folks in Des Moines. And I said, I will serve as the drug court judge, but we need to have a drug court in Northwest Iowa. And so that started the ball rolling. And now Judge Mayer and Judge Smith handle the drug treatment courts up in my neck of the woods. But what are treatment courts? Treatment courts are court programs that use a collaborative, multidisciplinary approach to address underlying factors such as substance use disorders or mental health disorder that may be contributing to a person's involvement in the judicial system. You'll have to forgive me if I was doing a live presentation like in person, I could look out over the crowd and just do a quick raise of the hands, but I don't think I can really do that given the format we're in. So if some of this is repetitive or you guys are like well versed in this stuff and I'm just telling you stuff you already know, I apologize. I will say this though, the one thing that's very different that we do up in Northwest Iowa, at least, that I thought was really important was, and you see like All Rise starting to move to this model now, where it's a multidisciplinary team. Let me explain what I mean by that. So yeah, of course you got me as the drug court judge. You got somebody from the Department of Corrections as the probation agent running the program with the court. You got your prosecutor, your defense attorney, and you got most important of all is your substance use person, your treatment provider, whoever that might be on the team. And that pretty much is the team. Like traditionally, that's the team, right? Some programs have a cop, some don't have law enforcement. It just kind of depends. In ours, I thought it was important to have law enforcement, and the reason being is that A lot of your best practice models with studies that are put out by All Rise will show an increase in the likelihood of success of the candidates if a law enforcement individual is on the team. Some of the pushback to that was, listen, is law enforcement going to be there to help folks in drug court, or are they going to be there to get intel gathering as to who's using? I think the answer to that is they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but obviously the primary motivator for law enforcement involvement can't be fact gathering and investigative purpose. And you got to have the right law enforcement agent, I think. I think personalities and finding the right person is important. And so, but we went one step further. What we did was, my thought was, why stop there? Like, why not have a community member who happens to be a successful CEO, but has an interest and investment in making sure that that we're having folks get help and be sober and live out in the community? Why not have the former addict or the mom who lost a son to drug overdose? Why not have a doctor from the hospital? Why are we not bringing in community members to help form this multidisciplinary team? So what we did is we put together, I call it kind of a quilt of different folks from the community that make a commitment to be at drug court every week. Some of those are maybe they're pastors in the community, but people who have a vested interest in helping the program. And so that, I think it's been incredibly successful. And I also think there's sort of a subsidiarity issue there where why would we not want the community to take ownership in the sobriety of the community? I mean, it's not just the judge, right, and the defense attorney and the prosecutor who deal with addicts. It's the neighbor. It's everybody in the community has a stake in making sure folks are sober. And I think it's a powerful model to give ownership to the community, accountability to the court, to the community. And I also think it's a powerful model for the actual client to know that there's people in the community who love and care for them, not just because it's Judge Sandy and they have to because that's the role they serve in the criminal justice system, but because they're there because they care. And I also found that having that multidisciplinary team collaborate like that, we come up with really creative and diverse solutions. Things that I may not know about in the area or have the wherewithal to help effectuate. You start bringing together people from different backgrounds, and we brainstorm ways that we can think outside the box to help deliver resources to people, whether it's transportation, incentives, rewards, sanctions. All of that. I think it's a powerful model. I think it's been wildly successful where we're at. I understand it's a little bit different, but like I said, All Rise is even recognizing, I think, at some level, the importance of this because they've now added a core team member to the team, and it's a peer mentor. Well, great. I just have 10 peer mentors, and they happen to be folks from the community who care, right? And so I think that that's been a great thing. Okay. We can go to the next slide. And then, Katrina, I may be rifling through some of this just to make sure we get to the meat and potatoes that I want to get to at the end, especially. But generally speaking, the history of treatment court started in 1989 down in Miami. That's where its genesis was. And then over time, it's evolved. I think there's more than 4,000 specialty treatment courts across the United States now. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Katrina. Some of them have like different subspecies. So there's like family treatment court, juvenile drug treatment court, veterans treatment court. There's a specific OWI treatment court that's funded by NHTSA. There's all these types of things. In fact, up in the Northeast, I talked to a judge from, I want to say Maine, New Hampshire maybe, but there's actually like a indigenous peoples treatment court specific to native tribes. Within the state of Iowa, we have first district is Judge Schubat, second district is Stott, first district in Waterloo, second district in both Marshalltown, Mason City, and Fort Dodge is Judges Kester, Haney, Rosenblatt. Up where I'm at again is Smith and Mayer. In Lamar's, we have Judge Neary, Bob Tiefenthaler's in Sioux City, and so on and so forth. I know that Judge Farrell is within the last 3 or 4 years just started up and maybe it's even sooner than that, in Polk County in the 5th District. There also is mental health court. We don't have that, unfortunately, in my neck of the woods. Sioux City, they do, but that's District 3B and 3A. We don't have a mental health court, in part just because of the numbers that we would have. But those are in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 7th, and 8th districts, respectively. And then there's also, like I said, the Veterans Treatment Court. I know that Judge Zacharias in the 4th District is involved in that, Judge Deck, Judge Parker, and others. There's family treatment courts. The closest one in my neck of the woods would be Storm Lake. But why, right? Why treatment courts? And this is, I go around talking to Rotary groups and Kiwanis clubs and different civic organizations to talk about what, not only what treatment courts are, but why. And the biggest one is it reduces recidivism rates. It's been proven to do that while also improving public safety, providing cost-saving measures, and it does so, I think, in a integrated way. Listen, I mean, obviously, folks that commit crimes of violence and the distinction between those crimes of violence and substance use, those don't always fit into neat compartments, right? I mean, usually it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg with some of that, right? And I get that. And certainly we don't want to be having violent individuals that are prone to commit heinous crimes out in the community use treatment court as a way to avoid incarceration necessarily. But I think that those screening tools on the front end are therefore so important to understand who are the appropriate candidates for treatment court. I always told folks that drug court's for the people that, like, when you hear that they're going to do drug court, like, I always watch like probation agents' eyes because like they're always like on an eye roll, like, oh God, okay. Like, I've been dealing with this person since they've been like, literally 9. This is never going to work. Those are the people I want in treatment court, frankly. Like, I want a drug court participant where they've already maybe done prison. Like, they are high need, repeat offenders, the toughest of the tough cases, while also making sure that it's really a substance use issue, not necessarily they're just violent. And it doesn't matter whether they're using drugs or not. I mean, they are violent, right? Trying to kind of screen those folks. Luckily, as a judge, I'm out of that equation. A lot of that happens, as you guys know, on the DOC side, through screening tools they use. But they work. And that's the thing that I think you can't argue with statistics. Go ahead to the next slide if you could. We've seen a drop in recidivism rates. And depending on what studies you look at, they have different impacts. Go ahead to the next slide. 2 of the studies showed a 13% drop in crime reduction, and that's across multiple drug courts across the United States. I'm not even talking about Iowa specific. Go ahead to the next one, and then the one after that. With respect to OWI courts, they're seeing 12%. Family treatment courts and mental health courts also drops. And then the cost is what's the big one. Go jump to 2, because this is one I slid in here. Richard may have heartburn about me using, but I don't care. The next one, if you could, Katrina. There we go. So what I did was I went and looked at what an RTF daily cost was at $114. This was, by the way, I think these are 21 numbers, so they very well have gone up. And you guys would know these numbers perhaps better than I have. But the cost in 2021 for a prison commit was $106.69. I went and took a look at the border parole statistics for the average length of stay on a C felony meth crime, right? A C felony possession with intent, C felony. And I took that average prison stay, multiplied it by what the average prison cost was, which was $106.69. And I came up with, and you guys can check my math, the average prison stay was about 14 months based on the border parole statistics I'd looked at. And I understand that that varies depending, but you're looking at about a $52,000 incarceration stay for that C felony meth sentence. versus drug court would cost about $6,246. And by the way, it has a better chance of actually helping the offender not find themselves back in the system again. So I think that that's an incredible statistic that I like to talk to folks about. Um, the next slide kind of talks about the effect of drug use on the brain. And here's why this is important for me to get into a little bit. I am by no means a medical expert, but what I can tell you is when I'm a judge and you're sentencing somebody or you're giving somebody within the drug court model a sanction or an incentive, and I'll get to that in a little bit, understanding the chemical change in an offender is vital to understanding what their proximate goals should be and shouldn't be. In other words, what are reasonable expectations that a judge can have for somebody to work their way through the program in terms of setting goals? And otherwise you're actually doing more harm than good because you're expecting things of them that they themselves cannot achieve right now. And all that does is reinforces learned helplessness. So I'll get to that in a little bit, but if you could go to the next slide for me. This just shows kind of the effect of what a normal brain looks like, and then a cocaine abuser 10 days to 100 days. Go ahead to the next slide if you could. And then methamphetamine use. Next slide. And then once abstinence is set. So I think the thing that's great about that is the middle model is somebody that has 1 month of abstinence, and then the later one is 14 months of abstinence. And I think the take-home point, go to the next one, Katrina. The take-home point of these images are really to show you that anywhere from really 6 months up to a year, that's how long it takes the brain to heal from rampant use. And so if you're expecting compliance within the first month, depending on what compliance looks like to you, with somebody that has this physical chemical change and is still healing, to not be aware of that as a judge or as a drug court panel is incredibly harmful to not only the client, but the toxicity of the group in terms of what they can expect and setting realistic goals and working through your phases. Go ahead and go to the one with the old lady doily. Sorry if you make these doilies, but I thought this was great. Evidence-based practices. And here's why I think this is great. I hear all sorts of opinions from all sorts of people all the time about how we need to resolve the drug court problem in America, or the drug problem in America. The Reagan just say no, folks, to zero tolerance. The first time you're caught with meth, send everybody to prison. I mean, I hear everything. And even within the multidisciplinary panel, one of the pushbacks or the weaknesses to that model is kind of like if there's too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes. You actually don't get things done. I always say there's a fine line between authoritarianism and democracy. And there's you got to find that middle ground there where we need to be efficient. But the big thing is just because you have an opinion doesn't mean I'm going to listen to it. The issue is whether the opinion is well-formed, right? And well-formed opinions come from evidence-based practices. And that's really important. Obviously that's important. It's important in medical care, right? We don't want people, eating gummy bears thinking that it'll get rid of their cancer, because of something their grandma told them. We want evidence-based practices. And so go ahead to the next one. There's sort of 4 components to that: health, home, purpose, and community. So those are really the 4 pillars. Is we focus in drug court on how are we helping somebody with their health? How are we helping them with their home? How are we helping them with their sense of purpose in life? And how are we building a community for them? Because evidence-based best practices show that when you focus on those 4 things and help stabilize those 4 things in somebody's recovery, that's going to beget the best chances for success. Go ahead to the next one if you could. And so the best practices standards kind of come out with a 10 subsection. If you look at All Rise's best practices, it's broken into 10 parts. And these are the 10 chapters. The first of which is identifying your target population. That's kind of the screening tool that I talked about before. The third, and I've kind of bolded what the take homes with this, but defining people's roles and responsibilities. You don't want the PO acting as a judge, and you don't want the judge acting as a social worker either. Incentive sanctions and service adjustments. I think that's the most important role of the judge. And I think that's the geniusness behind why drug court works. And I'll get to that in a second. But generally speaking, the reason I think that that's why drug court works is my time as a criminal defense attorney and as a district court judge led me to this conclusion, generally speaking. You have Tom. Tom's on supervision for drugs, methamphetamine specifically. Tom shows up for his probation meeting. Maybe in some jurisdictions it's every other week, but in my neck of the woods, more often than not, it was once a month. Tom shows up. Tom has a job. And, the PO hasn't heard anything, like Tom's not going to things he should be going to. But Tom tested dirty at his test. All right. Tom, don't do that again. All right. Okay, whatever. And we kick it out another month. Just, don't do that again. All right. Another month comes by. Tom shows up for his PO. He tests clean this time. All right. Kick you out again. Tom tests dirty the third time, but we know how backed up the courts are. Maybe I file a violation report. Maybe I don't. I'll give him one more time. Tom tests clean the next one. Then Tom tests dirty the next one. Now, we're 5 months into supervision. We've had 3 failed drug tests. PO either increases supervision or files a violation report. Fine, file that violation report. Hearing set in, I don't know, a month, maybe 2. Tom shows up for the hearing, says, I don't have an attorney. I need to get an attorney. So he files an application for court-appointed counsel. Court-appointed counsel gets appointed, and we continue the hearing because we need to make sure Tom has an attorney. All right. And by the time Tom has that attorney, maybe it's 3 or 4 months post-filing of the violation report, but really we're talking maybe a year, if not longer, from the time of first use. And then he sees a judge, and the judge is like, shocker, an addict tested positive for drugs? That's crazy. I'm not going to send him to jail. Here's what we're going to do. And my point is there's this delayed intervention that with the current model we have set up. And that's a huge problem. And the reason I think drug court's so ingenious is because I will know within a week. I will actually get an email the night you test dirty from the PO. That's like, hey, heads up, Randy tested positive. And Randy shows up with me as drug court judge within a week of him testing hot. And he's either going to lie, oh, it was my Benadryl, or he's going to have to tell Judge Sandy the truth that, hey, I relapsed. Here's the circumstances that led to it. And then we can have an honest conversation as a panel. How do we deal with that? So to help you, Randy, okay? We know you used. We know generally who you used with. We know generally maybe where you got it, but some of those details maybe you can talk with your PO about. But what does this look like, and how can we help you moving forward? And that's within hours, if not days, of the use. That's markedly different than how we traditionally do it in Iowa. And I think it makes a huge difference in what our results are. It also is why a lot of your offenders don't want to go to drug court because they know that the judge and the panel is going to be on you like stink on shit, and you're not going to get away with much. I mean, you are constantly on top of them. It's intense. And so it's, a lot of clients, I'd say, just send me to prison. I have no interest in working a drug court program. Okay, next slide. Relative to that first chapter, the screening process, this is admittedly where you guys probably know a lot more than Judge Sandy does, because there's different tests that you do. And I understand that Iowa maybe isn't currently using one that's been approved by All Rise or whatever. I don't know all the details of that. Richard Gordon knows that stuff much better than I do. But we try to figure out who's high risk and high need. And when we say high risk, I don't mean like high risk to the community. What we mean by high risk is high risk that they're going to not be successful on traditional probation. And high risk in that we expect for them to have repeated use even while on supervision. Okay, next slide. Now, role of the judge. This is the thing I think I can talk a little bit more intelligently about. Next slide, if you could. Incentive sanctions and service adjustments. This was chapter 4 in the best practices. Next slide. Here's my chart. Anybody that was in my drug court got nauseous when they'd see my chart because I'd always be like, well, what's the chart say? And they'd be like, Judge, we don't like enough with the chart. I'd be like, nope, we got to confer with the chart. And so I had laminated charts. I passed out charts to all my panel members. And I asked that my PO, who was helping run the drug court program, would actually use the chart. And so I like in her recommendation portion, I'd be like, I want you to tell me what you think I should do based on chart. And even within the chart, there's different options. Like there's not one answer with the chart. But the point is if you're not following the chart, that's a problem. And it's a problem. Why? It goes back to best practices, right? Evidence-based best practices, number one. Number two, use the chart in large part so that you're not treating different people that are doing the same thing differently when they meet all the different things that make them the same. I hope that made sense. But the point is like, obviously everybody's different. That goes without saying. But the point is drug court, we have everybody in there. It's not like it's a private drug court session. So if I have 10 people that are up for a particular session, they're all in there. And they are all watching to see what judge does with different people based on different behavioral prompts, right? So if they see person X get away with Y and they do that same behavior, but I come down on them, they're going to want to know, well, what differentiates my behavior from what I saw you do to person Y? And likewise, they'll know, okay, I better not do that because I saw that when person Y did that, they got X, and I don't want to be doing that, right? But the other thing is they also accept it more because they're going to be like, no, I knew that though. Like it's not like you're being arbitrary, Judge. I get it. Like you are looking at my individual needs and where I'm at in the phases. So there's 5 phases. So if you look on the left slide right now, it says determine the response level. And there's distal and proximate. So distal is like a goal that they can't do right now, right? That it's too far away. It's not something they can achieve for whatever reason. Proximate, and by the way, who determines what's a distal and proximate goal? Is it Judge Sandy? No. Is it the probation officer? No. Is it the prosecutor? Nope. Is it the defense attorney? No. It is a substance use provider, somebody that is educated, well-versed in addiction and disease so that they're able to tell you, based on my diagnostic assessment and where I think this individual is at, this is what I think is or is not a proximal and distal goal. And then based on what phase they're in, 1 through 5, you match it up with the goal that they can be expected. Proximal green, moderate blue, which is kind of, I don't know, maybe they could, maybe they can't. And then orange, which certainly is distal, right? And so you match that up with their phase and then the behavior. So if you look on the right slide, there's the identify the behavior, right? And so what you do is you identify the behavior, whether it's good or bad, and then you match it up with what phase they're in. Should be pretty easy because everybody's in a bucket. And then you figure out, based on the behavior and the phase they're in, and whether it's a distal or proximal violation, you figure out whether it's a level 2, 1, 3, 4, 5, what type of offense are we putting this in? And then you base your response on that. So there's 3 types of responses. There's a therapeutic response, a supervisory response, and a sanction response. Now, everybody thinks when they think drug court, somebody didn't do what they're supposed to do, put them in jail, right? Like that's actually the last step that I would ever do. In part because if I throw everybody in jail for every offense they have, sorry, my Coke Zero break, then what cards do I have left? What cards do I have left to play if everything gets a jail sanction? And I immediately went to DEFCON 10 for arguably a DEFCON 1 offense, right? You can't do that. So you got to take a look at, okay, well, and the other thing is whatever your response should be, if the reason you're doing the response is solely or exclusively for penal purposes, then what are you in drug court for? Like, if that's just called whatever, right? I mean, give them to, I don't know, File a probation revocation, kick them out of drug court, and send them to prison. Then I guess. I mean, if the goal here is to help them, right? Then we need to target the response accordingly. So with some offenders, if it would be like a relapse, or and I use relapse loosely. Relapse is technically when you've maintained a period of sobriety and have advanced in your phases such that we can say you're stable, and then you use. If somebody's never been sober, they never relapsed, right? They just never quit using. Or if they did quit using, maybe it was for the 30 days they were an inpatient and that was it, right? I wouldn't necessarily call that a relapse. But if they used, for example, then we'd take a look at where that falls on the chart. So, for example, um, a proximal, and this is what I always told the clients when they'd come into drug court. There are two things you can always do that are proximal in my drug court. And I know some people would take issue with some of this, but I don't care. This was my rule. Two things. Number one, you can always show up, right? You can always be present. Now, if there are issues with transportation, fine, let's talk about that. But the point is like you can show up and you can tell the truth. Those were like my two rules. Show up and don't lie to me. Tell the truth. You can't tell me that's not proximal. And in fact, I moved drug court from the county jail in Spencer to downtown Spencer at the city community building because I thought that the county law enforcement center was too far for people to get to bike or walk if they lived in town, right? And I didn't want to hear the excuse about I don't have a ride. And in fact, I used opioid money to start paying a transportation service in Spencer to pick people up who lived in the more rural areas. You can show up and you can tell the truth. And from there, I rely on the substance use provider in terms of what the different goals would look like. So if somebody, for example, failed a UA and they're in phase 1 and their substance use provider's telling me that that's a distal goal right now, unfortunately, of course I'm not going to give them jail sentence for use, right? If you look at the sanction response on the right slide on 3C, I'm not going to give them jail. And in fact, a level 1 sanction under the green, look, jail's not even available to me, you guys. Do you see that? I don't even have jail as an option until you get to a level 3 offense. And even then it's less than 24 hours. So part of this chart also helps the court or the judge and the panel figure out, even though we're really mad at Tom because he used, and I don't understand in my mind how that could be. The point is it helps you chart a path that's based on best evidence and based on a therapeutic substance use provider guiding that ship. It's not the substance use provider that's giving the sanction. Let me be clear, it's the judge. But it's the judge that's doing it in collaboration with the substance use provider. Okay, next slide. So, by the way, the other reason I don't like jail as a sanction, generally, I'm not saying it never is useful, but it tends to not work. I mean, you got to keep in mind, I already said the types of people that are going to be in this program, repeat people. Like if jail worked, they wouldn't be back in the program because a lot of them have already done jail or been to prison. And so, and this isn't just Judge Sandy's opinion. This is actual data. So go to the next slide if you could. Studies have shown that 1 to 3 or even up to 6 days of jail time in the right circumstances where it warrants it. Again, phase, distal proximal, what other types of interventions have you tried to do? And oh, by the way, while I'm on this, I want to talk about one more thing. I'm sorry, it just came into my head. The other mistake that I think, and no, I'll get to it. I have a slide on it. I'm sorry, scratch that. I'll get to it in a sec. But it shows that anywhere from 1 to 6 days is actually like the sweet spot. And once you get more than 6 days in incarceration or jail, look at that number. You go up to a 44% increase in use, actually. And I've seen this with certain clients that I know that were drug addicts that went away to prison. where they spent their time in prison. Not that you can't get illegal narcotics necessarily. I understand that they're doing all sorts of stuff with fentanyl and dipping it in paper and all that type of stuff. But my point is that I've had two clients I can think of in the past that have been released from prison and OD'd within 30 days. And the rates of overdose skyrocket for folks that get out of prison, not because we don't address substance use in prison necessarily. I'm not indicting the prison or the DOC in relation to what services we offer there. But my point is that they haven't built up the immunity to the drug yet. The tolerance level has dropped significantly, and they're not aware of that. And the stuff that's on the street is more potent than what they had before they went in. And when they come in, when they come out, they haven't learned with the right coping mechanisms to deal with some of this stuff. And they go to use like they used before they went. And that's the last time they use, unfortunately. And so, but I'm talking more county jail interventions as part of a drug court program. I can say in the 2 years I did drug court, I not once sentenced somebody to more than 72 hours in jail. I never had to. Um, and so, yeah, it's just food for thought. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Next slide. I kind of already talked about that. Yeah, this is one I get a lot, especially with fentanyl addiction. And this is the belief I had before I went to some of the training with All Rise and learn more about it. And the question is, isn't jail a better alternative than a casket? And I hear that a lot. Like the way so and so is going, a jail, we understand, Judge, a jail's not ideal, but if it's a holding place until they can get a bed at inpatient, it's better than the alternative. Um, I understand that argument. I'm telling you that the position of, first off, federal courts relative to Eighth Amendment and disability type law is that you can't and shouldn't be doing that. It's never came down, as I understand it, in the Southern or Northern District necessarily, but in other federal jurisdictions. My understanding, though, of All Rise and best practices are that you're not supposed to do that. Which is frustrating because I have talked to certain inpatient treatment facilities that won't take somebody that's coming in hot. And so it's like, well, how am I supposed to get them sober if I literally cannot get them to give you a clean test. And I can't put them in jail. So how am I ever supposed to get them into your facility? And that's a dance that we've done a few different times with different things. I know that although the beds are becoming less and less available, there are ways where you could maybe do a affidavit for substance abuse commitment, and hopefully that something sticks until a bed becomes available, and then coordinate that with the drug court program, so that the court makes that a requirement of the drug court during that time period. But it gets incredibly complicated. Next slide. I already kind of talked about this before, but go ahead, next slide. The importance of the team, and who the team members are. I got to tell you that having a law enforcement officer on the panel has been one of the things that I was most glad, I guess, because there was a strong contingent on the defense bar that did not want a law enforcement officer on the drug court. Their opinion, which I understood and I empathized with, was a lot of your offenders don't trust law enforcement. And if they see a law enforcement officers on the panel, they're going to shut down. They're not going to want to open up. It's going to hurt the process. And I got to say that I wondered about that. And as soon as a law enforcement officer was on that panel, he opened up doors that were incredible. And I can tell you, I was moved to tears when we had a graduation ceremony from drug court and a law enforcement officer walked up to the front of the stage and handed a bouquet of flowers to the offender, and the offender hugged the law enforcement officer, and those two shared a moment. And it was incredible to see the community policing that I thought law enforcement stepped up and did and helped with that. I also thought that accountability was great with law enforcement because they would be able to tell the team without violating anybody's confidences necessarily within their own department. Hey, I'm hearing a lot of chatter here, and I have concerns that so and so is using or not using, and it was incredible to see law enforcement's involvement with that. Um, and the statistics show that the success rates skyrocket with law enforcement on the panel. So I've had very good impressions of law enforcement being involved on it. The team member impact, those are some. Go ahead to the next slide if you could, Katrina. But it just shows the increase in success rates when you have judge, prosecutor, and defense attorney. As I understand it, there are certain programs that don't have a judge show up. In certain jurisdictions, that is not best practice. I've never heard that as being a model that's appropriate. And so, in any event, that's a concern if that's happening, in my opinion. Go ahead to the next slide. The last bullet point there talks about when a law enforcement is on a team, recidivism goes down by 88%. That's from All Rise statistics taken across the nation. When law enforcement attends court sessions, recidivism goes down 83%. The 5 phases. I talked a little bit about the 5 phases. The first is acute stabilization. That's where I talk about showing up and being honest. Phase 2, as the offender or client works their way through the phases, the requirements and what time am I at? Okay, 2:41. Becomes more stringent, as would be expected. As they work through, we expect more of them. And remember when I talked about proximate and distal goals? What at one time was distal becomes more proximate as they work their way through the phases. And what was one time a proximate goal is something that, not that I don't applaud still, but it's something that, frankly, I'm not going to necessarily shower them with a treat, so to speak. I mean, we have different things that we use to help folks in terms of sanctions versus incentives. What I would give an incentive for somebody in phase 1 with a proximal achievement is going to be very different than what I give somebody in phase 4 with that's still achieving that same thing, but again, we expect more. So it goes through phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and phase 5. Once they've hit phase 5, they're ready for graduation. We will not, at least in the drug courts I was involved with, we will never graduate somebody from drug court who's not maintaining sobriety. So you can't get out of phase 4 or phase 5, I believe, without sobriety. The one thing I must have missed it, but the one slide that I said I would get back to that I never did, but has been on the forefront of my mind this entire time, is the notion of incentives. And I'll say this. I think with drug court and with a lot of folks in the correctional community, an emphasis is on punishment, right? And we need to make sure we curb behaviors with incarceration or punishment. And I'll say this, that for a drug addict, when they use drugs, it's been my experience that one of the benefits of using drugs to them is they get that high every time they use, right? It's instant gratification. It's instant. And I think the reason incentives are so important is they need to understand that when you do something good, you get that same instant gratification. That's the way their brain has been wired, and that's what they understand. And so I think one of the downfalls to drug courts can sometimes be the focus on the negatives the whole time, instead of saying, hey, you did these 10 things right, but you did this one thing wrong, and give them the praise that they deserve for the 10 things they did right, and making sure that they understand that they get a reward for that, that we're approving of that. Even it doesn't even have to be, gimmicky like a gas card. It could just be the judge saying, attaboy, you did good. I expected this from you, and you followed through and you delivered on it. Um, while also not hiding from the things that need improvement, obviously, right? And so I think that that's so important. And the slide that I had, and I must have taken it out because I was worried about time or I wasn't in a group setting where I could see you all, was oh, that was the last graduate I had from drug court. By the way, I have his permission to use that photograph. But and that's also his son that he had not seen in a number of years. And he showed up for the drug court graduation. But I think that the slideshow was a group of like 10 equations, right? Like two times two is four, or whatever, right? And I'd always ask a group like, what do you see in this slide? And I'd get a response of, well, that one is wrong. And so I had one wrong equation up on the slide. And almost everybody pointed to the wrong equation, right? And the reason I like that slide is because it goes to show that I think we're programmed to take a look at, well, what'd you do wrong? And despite the fact that every other equation on that board might have been right, that's not the point. The point is we focused on the one wrong equation. And I try hard to kind of get that out of drug court that yes, we need to talk about the things that the offender or the client can work and do better on. But it's so important to also recognize the thing they're doing well on. Are you telling the truth? Are you showing up? Are you doing things like showing up to work? Are you doing things like staying in good communication with the various providers we're having you stay in communication with? Those are huge deals to an addict. Those are not easy tasks. They're easy for you or me, but they are not easy for somebody that's still healing from the damage that they did to their brain from methamphetamine use. And so making sure that you give them, as best as you can, that same sense of gratification and delivery of praise that they would get from the euphoria of a hit. That's what you're competing with. And trying to target that is vital to the interventions, both sanctions, but incentives. I'm open for any questions. I see that there's some stuff, some questions on the side. Hopefully I don't get gagged by the Supreme Court for anything I said.
Thank you, Judge. So we do have a question from ICIW. Can clients who are on parole or work release status participate in treatment court?
I honestly don't know the answer. First, I never had any parolee in drug court when in my district. Um, I've never had that request made, nor have I ever seen that. So I don't know the answer to that, but that's one of those things I would defer to my PO on because I don't know if the Department of Corrections has a policy on that or not.
Can I speak to that, Judge Sandy?
Yeah, go ahead, whoever that is.
So I'm Blake with the second district, and I used to do drug court in Webster County before coming a supervisor. And Judge Kester would not allow work release or parole because she would not have direct jurisdiction over them. The Board of Parole would have jurisdiction over them, so she wouldn't allow them into the drug courts.
Okay. There you go.
Then we have someone had just made a statement. TBI survivors are extremely hard with chronic brain damage that remains and does not show up on MRIs. Mix that with substance use and mental health, hard residents to help become successful.
Yeah, and so what's the question? Oh, I'm sorry, Jennifer.
It was just a statement they made, something they just made.
I did have one or two clients in my time on drug court where I ended up having to discharge them unsuccessful, but not because they didn't work the program, because, and I'm not saying the screening tool was bad, but we found out through the course of working with them that they were not good candidates for drug court because of TBI. And what do I mean? And it was a combination of that and just borderline intellectual functioning, where the barrier wasn't so much the use, it was just the capacity. And I'm hesitant to say capacity because you don't want to, it's not because it's not because they didn't want to get clean or because the addiction was so bad they didn't have the capacity. That's not what I mean by that. But the capacity wasn't there just because I just don't think they had the intellectual functioning to understand the phases and communicating. I mean, they needed a group home more than they needed drug court. And unfortunately, there was no other option other than them finding themselves in our drug court program. And one person in particular had such bad trauma and such significant mental impairment and mental struggles that like she would usurp, if we had 3 hours devoted to drug court. So how I work drug court is I do it on a weeknight. I do it on Tuesday nights. And I'd either order Domino's or cook ribs. One time I had a barbecue. And so we had two groups. One would go from like 4:30 to 6. The other group would go from like 7 or 6:30 to 8, 8:30. And then we'd eat dinner together in the middle part of that. So um, we'd cook, we'd eat together at one big table, and then we'd split shifts in terms of when their sessions would be. But I mean, going back to that, she would take up. Hell, I'd have to stop her at like 20 minutes from just kind of incoherent rambling sometimes because I mean, she was almost using drug court as a therapy session. And it just got to be too much where we couldn't function. She was freezing us up because of some of the things she was dealing with.
We have another question. One of the things that I hear about drug court is a lack of aftercare. Can you speak to that?
Well, I mean, fair enough. I mean, the average length of drug court stay, generally speaking, is about 18 months. Sometimes if a candidate's doing really well, certainly they could finish before that. And I've had people up to 3 years before in drug court where they're like, gosh, this is never going to end. Um, but they just weren't phased. They weren't working through their phases. And I wasn't going to quit on them. And so we were just kind of in this constant, fight. And eventually they broke through. But yeah, you're right. I mean, once they're discharged after phase 5, it's kind of like you encourage them to continue the 12 steps if they're doing that to work through that. Hopefully they have a sponsor. Hopefully some of the therapy or a counseling that they're partaking in continues on because those aren't things contingent on drug court, right? They're in addition to and things we require. But there's no reason those things need to stop. Um, but to this day, I still check up on one guy that graduated the program, works at Baumgars, and every time I'm in there, I stop by and see him. But I mean, you're right. I mean, it's not like we as a program have things where we check up on. We do have an alumni event that we do where for all graduations, we send an invite to our alum who have graduated. Um, and then once a year, usually we do a big cookout where everybody at drug court, I kind of call it fun night, where we actually don't do drug court, but have kind of a get together where we could also invite we also invite alum. Yeah, I hear you.
I
Anything
think that
else?
is it for questions. Karen said, I love the chart. Kudos, Judge Sandy. You're well versed and knowledgeable about all RISE best practices and research. And we actually did just get one more question. Tracy asked, does judge court require 12 steps? If so, is there any move to make a more I can't see that, pathways to recovery approach?
Yeah, so that's a hot topic because the 12-step program is still a deity-based program, and there's certain federal jurisdictions that have said you can't force, for compliance purposes, a 12-step program in its particularity, which is correct. So usually what I'd say is if you're uncomfortable, you can pick and choose whatever program you want. There was Celebrate Recovery, there was the 12-step program. The problem is when you only have one option in the community and you make a program like that required, right? You know, thankfully so I would never make it a requirement. but I never had to because all the candidates I had come through wanted to do the program on their own without me having to make like a court order. But I would caution any judge, you should not order, I don't think you can legally order a 12-step program. I think you can order community-based, like a peer type, like that type of thing. I can't, the name's escaping me right now. I'm sorry. But that you can, I think you can order that type of thing, just not that thing because it's deity based. And so it runs afoul of the First Amendment.
Great. Thank you so much, Judge Sandy. It's been a pleasure having you here and an honor. So I
I
think
just saw this too, the medical assisted recovery. That's a great point. So I met with local doctor Zach Boris at our hospital, and we talked about him. He sees, so we have a program where he actually works with our drug court clients specifically, and he's well versed and trained in medical assisted recovery programs and medications relative to that. And that's important too. I can't believe I forgot that.
And Mara is actually a 12-step program for people who are in a medication-assisted recovery, because some 12-step groups do not consider you actually sober if you're using medication to be sober and have felt rejected. And so this guy created it. He's got 12 steps. And most of the groups, you know, for our needs are virtual because there's only one in-person group in Iowa, but I've referred a few clients to it, and so far they've liked the information that they found there.
The other thing that I think, the last parting thing that I would say for any other legal professionals that might be listening or that type of thing is in Dickinson County and Clay County, the response from law enforcement has been overwhelmingly positive. And I made a very conscious effort on the front end before this even got off the ground to meet with, in Dickinson County, for example, there's the Arnold's Park, the Milford, the Spirit Lake, the Okoboji, the Lake Park, DNR, State Trooper. There's like 8 different law enforcement agencies in one small county. And I made a point to talk to all of them about what this is, what we've been doing, and the approach that we're taking and what this program's meant for. And we had a very healthy back and forth exchange, and it was awesome. And so I do think that it's really important to also explain and talk to law enforcement in the community about what this is and why you're doing it. And I think that helped tremendously with some of the buy-in. All righty. Thank you, everybody. If you have questions, feel free to email me.
Thank you so much.